Thank you all so much for being here. I'd like to take a few minutes to kind of introduce our speaker, Colleen Cirillo, who is leading tonight's talk. Colleen's expertise is in nature interpretation, education, conservation, and sustainability. She has worked with organizations such as Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, Ontario Nature, Toronto Botanical Gardens to support conservation and sustainability focused programs, policies, and practices. Currently, she works with the David Suzuki Foundation on the Butterflyway Project. She has also served on many committees and boards, including those of NAMPS, our very own NAMPS, Ontario Invasive Plant Council, LEAF, and Project Swallowtail. At present, she is the chair for Horticulture Outreach Collaborative, whose aim is to protect native plant diversity in Ontario. Her love of native plants is reflected in all she does, and we are fortunate to have her here with us tonight to share her extensive knowledge and passion for native plants and gardening. So with that, I welcome you, Colleen, and I pass the screen over to you.
Natasha, can you let me know if you can see the screen?
I can see the screen.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, NAMPS, for inviting me to speak with fellow plant lovers. It's something I really enjoy doing, and my family enjoys it because then I don't have to talk to them about plants, because unfortunately they are not plant lovers. I am calling in from Toronto, and this is where I garden and where I explore nature. So I am coming with a more urban perspective, and a very Southern Ontario perspective, but I'm going to be featuring species that have large ranges and for the most part do well in they're quite adaptable. So they do well in different situations, because I wanted this talk to be applicable to people, whether they're calling in from Newfoundland, BC, whatever. So I'll do my best to keep it interesting and relevant. I like to talk about native shrubs because I feel that they are overlooked and underused in our gardens and our parks, despite the fact that they're essential from an ecological point of view, and they're beautiful and they're interesting, and they are, like I said, highly variable. So you can find a native shrub that will work in any type of situation, whether you want a formal garden or a more natural looking garden, whether you have a dry, sunny space or a wet, shady space, there is a native shrub for you, because the form and the size and the conditions that they live in vary quite a bit. Oh, sorry, I wanted to mention that the shrub that you see here is fragrant sumac. I'm not going to spend a lot of time speaking about it because it has a smaller range, but here in Southern Ontario, we do have this plant and I love it. The leaves are scented. If you rub them, you get a nice little spicy scent, and it has this beautiful red color in the fall. So if you're interested in native plants, this is an excellent alternative to, say, some of the non-natives that we see and some of the invasives we see, like burning bush. I've worked on a number of the Grow Me Instead guides. That's a publication that looks at non-native invasive garden plants and then suggests alternatives that will do well in a similar situation. And so this is one that we like to promote as a hedge in place of burning bush, even in place of privet or barberry, because it doesn't get very big, it's dense, and it has a beautiful fall color. Now, like I said, that one is native to a smaller area, not across the country. This is a picture I took way back in 2002 when I was visiting one of the first native plant gardens that I ever visited. It was in South Etobicoke in Christina Sharma's yard. And I had just started working on a project with Toronto and Region Conservation Authority called Healthy Yards. And it was such a pleasure to work on that project. It was all about trying to create habitat right at home. So I wanted to just give a brief definition of native plants in case there's anyone here participating in the webinar that's new to native plants. And if you're very familiar, you can just go get some water or something, but I'll be quick. I think it's really important that we understand what we're talking about. A native plant has existed in an area for millennia and has evolved along with other native species of plants, animals, fungi, and bacteria in the presence of native soils and climatic conditions. Native plants play an important and foundational role in ecosystems. They provide food, shelter, nesting material for insects, birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. Despite their beauty and their ecological significance, native plants remain a mystery to many, myself up until I was 20 years old, as an example, and they're underrepresented in nurseries and gardens. So today we're going to look at native shrubs, one group of plants, of native plants. I would highly recommend, if you're interested in learning about the connections between flora and fauna, two of my favorite authors are Douglas Tallamay. I'm sure many of you are are fans of his, and also Heather Home, who is from Ontario, but now lives in the United States. Both of them have written extensively on the connections between flora and fauna. And they talk a lot about specialization, because in the insect world, and especially at the larva stage, insects are quite particular about where they will get their nourishment. And in some cases, they're highly specialized, being able to consume only one plant or plants from a particular genus. So Heather Home and Douglas Tallamay have a lot to teach us on these connections, flora and fauna connections. Before we get into this, the recommendations for native shrubs, I wanted to give a few more definitions. Now, I've used these terms quite a lot, but I understand that some people are not fond of these terms. And recently, when I was watching a Douglas Tallamay webinar, I heard him use three new to me terms: contributor, non-contributor, and detractor, when he was talking about plants. But first, I'll discuss these ones. So again, just want to make sure we're on the same page here. So a non-native or introduced plant is one that was brought into a region by human activity, sometimes accidentally, sometimes deliberately. An example might be a vegetable that you grow in your garden to consume. A non-native plant, a naturalized plant is non-native. It's dispersed itself in the region, but it doesn't as yet cause a serious threat to ecological, economic, or human health. However, these naturalized plants are not really contributing. So even though they're not outright detrimental, the fact that they are taking up a lot of space that could be used by or could be inhabited by native plants is a concern. Now, an invasive species is a non-native species which readily self-disperses in a region and has negative impacts on biodiversity, native biodiversity, the economy, and/or society, including human health. So Tallamay's terms, a contributor would be a plant that contributes. So a native plant that is going to feed insects, as an example. A non-contributor might be, as an example in my area, the ginkgo tree, which is not invasive, but it doesn't host any of our native insects. And then a detractor would be an invasive plant. And as an example, here on the screen, you see butterfly bush and autumn olive. So these are two that I encounter all the time. And here in Ontario, butterfly bush is not considered invasive, not yet, but in British Columbia, they do have this on their list of plants to avoid in your garden because it is showing itself to have invasive tendencies. In the Toronto area where I live, there's Russian olive and autumn olive all through the ravines. And before we knew how important native plants were, we would sometimes recommend these plants, the olives, for bird gardens. Now we know better, and we know that we need native plants to support birds at different stages in their lives. I'm a gardener, and so it kind of hurts to acknowledge this, but obviously horticulture has played a big role in the situation with invasives. Horticulture is a pathway for invasive plants. But there's a really cool group that has just started up maybe in the last year or two called the Canadian Council for Regulation of Invasive Plants. A couple of amazingly intelligent and articulate women, Claudette and Kathy, are leading this charge to really get government and industry to deal with the issue of invasive plants that are still coming in through the horticultural trade. I wanted to put this picture up because these are the plants I grew up with. And wherever you grew up in Canada, I bet you are familiar with these shrubs. There's such a homogeneity homogeneous character of all of our suburban lawns. So I grew up in the west part of Etobicoke by the west part of Toronto by the airport, so Etobicoke. And these were some of the shrubs that were in my garden. And none of them are native, and two of them are considered invasive in my area. Others that I also encountered were privet and barberry, also non-native. Now barberry is considered invasive. And many of the other plants I encountered at gardens, other people's gardens and nurseries, were also non-native. It wasn't until my late teens when I started university, and then when I was 20 and I had this incredible job tree planting in the city of Toronto, that I came to know about native plants and understand how important they are. And I like to mention the botanist that I worked beside, who still works as an incredible field botanist, Gavin Miller. He's still with Toronto Region Conservation. I was mentioning to Natasha earlier that summer that I spent working beside him, it basically set the course for my life. I started to learn about native plants, and I've been learning about them ever since. And I still have so much to learn because there are so many. Why add native plants and native shrubs in particular to your garden? Because in so many parts of our world, our landscapes are settled. They're dominated by humans. And so we can't just leave the other areas outside of our cities and towns for nature. We want to bring nature home. And that is the key message of Talame's writing. There's on the next slide, I'm pretty sure, I have a quote at the top of the screen. I hope you can see it. All plants are not equal in their ability to support wildlife. So he's talking about the fact that even though native plants do support insects more so than non-native plants, there are some that are even more exceptional, that are the biodiversity superheroes. And he mentions oak, willow, cherry plum, birch, poplar, cottonwood. These are the top ones that he mentions. Now, Talame looks mainly at, or at least in his earlier writings, at Lepidoptera, so moths and butterflies, and in particular, the larva stage, so the caterpillars. And who loves to eat caterpillars? Birds love to eat caterpillars. So if we bring in these insect-rich species, or those are the genus, so the genus is the order, the organizational order above species, then if we bring in species from these genuses, then we know that we're going to get more species of moths and butterflies. And also native plants will hold water, the shrubs especially. I used to plant them along stream banks back when I was 20 to 22. I spent my summers doing that to try and protect the soil from erosion during storms, and also to prevent flooding because they would hold on to water. So now I'm going to show a few of my favorite species, and I could have added so many, but I think I've got about 10 to 12 here. And I'm sure that all of you have your favorite species as well. These are ones that I'm more familiar with. And like I said, ones that I know have a large range. So hopefully they will appeal to and be accessible to many of you. Sometimes the top will include a species name, and sometimes it will include just the genus, and then I'll have a species name written below, because the Prunus genus has so many species. And so this is one that is wide-ranging, chokecherry, and that will work in many situations. So I've included the Latin name, and I would definitely suggest that when you go to purchase plants that you bring the Latin name with you. And there are specialized native plant nurseries, and I've got some sourcing information that I will share with you later. Sorry, my phone's just ringing. I'm going to turn that off. So Prunus is the genus here. The species is Prunus virginiana, or chokecherry, not to be confused with chokeberry, which is different and is coming up later. The Prunus is third on Talame's list of woody plant groups that are important for caterpillars, and including those little inchworms, which are a type of caterpillar that birds love to consume so much. Chokecherry shrubs produce copious amounts of berries, as you can see in that picture. That's a picture from my backyard. And these berries will help sustain birds through the summer. Often with our native shrubs, we see this pattern of flowers of supporting birds in the spring because of all the insects on the shrubs, and then supporting birds in the summer or early fall because of the berries and the nuts. So that's a great way. If you include native shrubs and you like birds, you don't need to bother with a bird feeder. You will be bringing the birds in early in the year when they're looking for insects to feed their babies, and you will be bringing them in later in the year when they need the high fat berries to consume to get through the fall or possibly to even start migrating south. What else can I tell you about this one? It grows 4 to 10 meters tall. It has cylindrical clusters of white flowers in the spring, and then the red purple berries. In my backyard, cardinals, robins, blue jays, they all consume these berries, but they're also popular with scarlet tanagers and red-bellied woodpeckers. I just don't get those in my backyard. We can process them into jams and jellies, syrup, and wine as well. And I wanted to mention that like these, I might give flowering times and fruiting times that are different than what you experience. And that's because Canada is so huge. And it also depends on the microclimate of your garden. Now this one can sucker as it does in my backyard, but I do have a very small yard and I don't necessarily want it to all be chokecherry. So I just deal with the suckers as they come up. Sometimes I let them go through the summer and then I cut them back in the fall, just so I'm not looking at an ugly fence and I can enjoy the suckers through the summertime and then cut them back in the fall. What's also good about this particular plant, and some people think of it as a weed because it grows everywhere. I know my father-in-law used to always think of it as a weed simply because of that, but I don't. I love it and I know that it brings birds into my garden. It does perfectly well in disturbed porous soil. It also does well in clay soil. So sometimes those are difficult gardening conditions, but chokecherry will take care of you. One problem I did have with chokecherry in my backyard was I got some black knot on a couple of the branches on one of the trees. And so I just made sure to prune those with a clean tool in the fall after the leaves had dropped. And then I threw that away. I didn't put any of that in my compost or leave it in my garden. Here is chokeberry, which is part of the Aronia genus. And this is truly one of my favorite. Oh, sorry, did I skip I'm just wondering if I skipped my willows. No. Okay, so let's go to chokeberry. So chokeberry isn't as tall as the chokecherry, and it's in a different genus, although the name is kind of similar. And I've got black chokecherry featured here. It has these, again, beautiful white flowers and then a darker berry. I love this one because I feel like it gives and gives and gives all the time. So in the springtime, you get the pretty flowers. Then you get the berries that can be consumed by us, as well as all sorts of wildlife. And it's a great shrub. It's great. It's dense, so it's good for like a hedge or for privacy. It's a great alternative to barberry, just like the other one I mentioned earlier, which was the fragrant sumac. Willow. Okay, well, willows are fantastic. They're mentioned over and over again by Heather Home and by Talame, because there are so many species of insects that depend on willow. I put pussy willow on the left side of the screen. I've got a picture of pussy willow, but there are so many species you could choose depending on where you are in the country. This particular species does have a wide range, so it would work across much of Canada. One problem with willows is it is hard to tell them apart. I certainly can't. So I would definitely, if you were interested in willows, go to a specialized native plant nursery and ask for assistance. Willows are ranked by Talame as second only to oaks in their ability to support Lepidoptera larvae. That's how important they are. And Heather Home often talks about all the bees that use willow, especially the early emerging bees. And here is a picture from Heather Home of a bee on Beb's willow. Pussy willow is a large shrub, so if you have a small garden, it might not be appropriate. It can grow up to 19 feet tall. The male catkins are white at first, and then they turn yellow when the pollen is released. The female catkins are on separate plants, and they have green capsules. So as I said, it's really important for early emerging bees. When I was young and growing up surrounded by non-native plants and lawns, I would always see bees on dandelions. And so like many people, I assumed dandelions were really good for bees. But later, as I got older, I realized they were on the dandelions because there was nothing else. And Heather Home writes a lot about this, that it's a lower quality pollen. And so if you want the high quality pollen for those emerging bees, willows are definitely the way to go. Pussy willow is also a host plant, so it supports the caterpillars of morning cloak butterfly. Morning cloak butterfly should be flying around pretty soon here in Southern Ontario. It's always the first butterfly I see because it overwinters as an adult. And when it comes out, there's nothing for it to consume really except the sap on trees. Pussy willow prefers full sun to part shade and medium to wet soil. It's great for shorelines if you have any water on your property, for low areas, for naturalized and pollinator gardens. It is a clonal plant, so it will spread by rhizomes to form thickets, but you can, again, manage that by every year going out and removing the stems you don't want. Some other willows that would be fantastic to look at, there's Scowler's willow, which is more prevalent in the west area, the west coast. Peach-leaved willow, also on that goes from Ontario west to British Columbia. And sage-leaf willow, which is Labrador to Alaska, that's its native range. It's also a multi-stemmed shrub with blue-green leaves. So if you want a little bit of different leaf color, that's the one you'd like to get. Now, this is truly my favorite shrub. I have this one growing just outside my kitchen garden. My mom passed away many years ago, and as a gift, friends of mine that worked at Toronto Region Conservation Authority gave me one of these shrubs, and I put it outside my kitchen. It was maybe a foot tall, and now it goes up to the second level. My kids and I would pick the berries every late June, early July. So it's a tree that really means a lot to me. It's fantastic. It works so well in the garden. It has a dappled shade, which is nice if you have a small garden, you don't have a lot of land to play with, because I can still grow all sorts of herbaceous native plants below serviceberry. Again, it has white flowers. So many of our shrubs have white flowers. This is a picture from Heather of a bee on one of the serviceberry flowers. And then the other two pictures that aren't anywhere near as good quality are mine. So one is of the berries that we pick and consume. Often I am in that shrub and there are all sorts of birds all around me, and we are competing for the berries. They're delicious and they're nutritious. And in the fall, you have this gorgeous red color, or you can have a peach-like color as well. This prefers full sun, this species, and the berry production does go down if it's in the shade. It tolerates clay and pollution, and it is one of the native species that you do see in the nursery trade. It grows to between 15 and 25 feet, depending on the conditions. And I mentioned about the open canopy, but the last thing I'll say that also makes it lovely is a smooth gray bark. Elderberry, another one of my favorites. This is one that I often see when I go to visit my in-laws' cottage. It's all around their cottage, in the ditches and along the edges of the creek and the pond. There are two native elderberry shrubs that we can consider for our gardens. Both would work. Here I'm featuring the common, or also called the Canada elderberry. And this one, the other one is called a red elderberry, and it's a little more in the west. I adore this one. And we can consume, we can make edible products with, and drinkable products with flowers and the berries. And of course, the birds love the berries. It's fast growing, it's multi-stemmed. It has a broad rounded crown and arching branches. I tried putting this one in my garden, but because I live in a city with a small garden, I ended up removing it and bringing it over to my in-laws' house, where they have plenty of room to let it grow. So it has lightly scented showy white flower clusters in June, July, more July probably. And then they're followed by these drooping clusters of dark purple berries, purple black berries. Now, another thing that's really cool about this, it has pithy stems. And what that means is the stem is kind of like, insects love it for habitat. So if you have this plant, this shrub in your garden, one thing you can do to make it even more beneficial to insects is to cut a few of the stems and leave the stems standing. And that is a way that cavity nesting bees will enter. and then they can spend their winter there. Let's go on to dogwoods. This is a genus with many species that exist in Canada, and many of them are wide ranging. So you can definitely find a dogwood species that would work in your garden. I'm featuring here alternate leaf dogwood, which happens to be my favorite dogwood, particularly because of the structure of it. And these are regularly used in gardens. You can find them in regular nurseries, which is not typical for our native plants. So it's unique among dogwoods for having an alternate leaf pattern. So instead of the leaves coming like this on the stem, they're like this. It's also called pagoda dogwood for its attractive horizontal tiers of branches. It's a common understory or forest edge species throughout southern Ontario. Its native range is eastern North America. In Canada, you'd find it from Newfoundland west to Manitoba. It's large. It reaches 15 to 25 feet in ideal conditions. It prefers partial shade and evenly moist soils that are well drained. If you have it in full sun, I've seen it in full sun, and I actually planted it in full sun, almost full sun in my neighbor's yard. We just make sure that we give it enough water during the dry periods of the summer and that we keep it well mulched. And that mulch could be either green living mulch, like plants, low-lying plants, or bark. Birds such as vireos, bluebirds, catbirds, kingbirds, the list is long, consume the high-fat berries. We do not consume these berries. Many insects will feed on the leaves, the wood, and other parts of dogwood shrubs. And moth and butterfly caterpillars are an example. And who loves to eat them? The birds. So again, this is another shrub where you will bring birds in the spring because of the insects, and then in the summer because of the berries. There are many bees that visit the flowers for pollen, including mining bees, small sweat bees, and metallic green bees. Another beautiful dogwood that's not featured here, but you'll see it in another slide in a little bit, is the red osier dogwood. It's probably familiar to all of you. And this one is, people love it because of the winter interest, the red stems and the twigs. It's a good option if you don't want too tall a dogwood. It's a little bit shorter, maxing out at about 10 feet. It's excellent as a specimen shrub or en masse for a privacy hedge. It's very adaptable for different types of soil. It has white blooms in the spring and then white fruit later in the summer. And it's pretty cool because it hosts that little azure butterfly caterpillar, which is a really pretty little blue butterfly. So if you like the butterfly, you want this shrub that hosts the caterpillar of that butterfly. Now in British Columbia, there's a Grow Me Instead guide that's created by the Invasive Species Council out there. And they promote dogwood as a fire smart and pollinator friendly alternative to knotweeds. As we all hear in the news all the time, BC fires are just getting worse and worse. And so gardeners have to be conscious of so many things: climate change, supporting pollinators, and now in BC also what makes sense from a fire prevention point of view. And so this is one that is promoted heavily by the British Columbia Invasive Species Council. Viburnums. There are so many shrubs in the viburnum genus that I love, that I'm familiar with from my hikes in the woods here in Southern Ontario. So it was hard to pick one, but Nannyberry was the first one I got to know because it was planted along the Black Creek. So this is the one I went with. These shrubs in general are gorgeous. They're wildlife supporting, and they do well in a diversity of habitats. And so with wetlands and forest as well, you could find viburnum. Nannyberry is a dense multi-stemmed shrub. It produces these beautiful showy white flowers, as you can see on the screen, and then later the dark berries. And this is one that we can eat the fruit, which is pretty cool. We can eat it raw or cooked, if we can get them before the birds, because these are very popular with robins, thrashers, catbirds, cardinals, and waxwings. Also very popular with long and short-tongued bees who visit the flowers for pollen and nectar. Some shrubs will produce just pollen, some of the flowers, but this one is pollen and nectar. It reaches anywhere from 6 to 15 feet high, It's highly adaptable in that it will grow in a diversity of soil types. It likes full sun to shade, to partial shade. Nice as a specimen plant. I have one of these I put in a neighbor's garden, and right now it's just the one, although I have plans to put in more, but right now it looks good just on its own with some mulch and a few ground covers around it. But it also can work as a hedge or a windbreak. And we encourage people to use this as an alternative to barberry in the Grow Me Instead guide, because barberry is a non-native that also is invasive in some parts of Canada. Other viburnum species that would work, at least here in Southern Ontario, are arrowwood and hobblebush and wild raisin. Now, those might be hard to come by. Even the nannyberry might be a little hard to come by, unless you go to the specialized native plant nurseries. And again, more to come on that. Smooth rose or smooth wild rose is a lovely one that I have in my front garden. And the picture of the flower is from my garden, not the one of the hip. So this is an alternative to the fussy roses that I was never fond of, but many of my uncles and my neighbors were very fond of the fussy roses, and they would spend a lot of time and add a lot of different things to the soil and sprays. I don't do any of that. I do a little bit of cutting back to increase circulation. But smooth rose is a small multi-stem shrub. This would be nice in a small area. If you have a small garden, you might want to consider this. It grows only 4 to 6 feet tall. In the late spring or early summer, it has these pretty pink flowers, which is a change because most of our shrubs have white flowers. So it's nice to have a little different color. And then you can see that nice yellow interior of the flower. In the late summer, you get the red rose hips, which persist through the winter. Now, mine is all of a sudden in shade as a bur oak. I planted has grown quite a bit, and other things are growing up around it. So I don't get as many flowers as I'd like, but it used to get many, many flowers when it was more in the sun. So yeah, it likes full to part sun. It does well in dry to moist soil, so it's adaptable. Now, when I see it in the wild, I see it along shorelines or in prairies, in meadows, abandoned fields, and I often, well, not often, but I sometimes also see it around roadsides. Its native range is Saskatchewan, east to the Atlantic provinces. This is one I only really discovered maybe 5-6 years ago when I happened to be visiting my in-laws' cottage, again, near Gravenhurst, around this time of year, or maybe a little bit later. And it's the beaked hazel. So this is part of the Corylus genus, and I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly. Beaked hazel is one species that I'm featuring, but there are many. This is a small to medium-sized shrub. It's found across much of North America. It's a great option for a hedge instead of privet or barberry. It grows 4 to 8 feet tall. Now, before it leaves out, see that top picture on the left? That's it in the spring. Before the leaves come out, there are these drooping yellow-gray catkins. They're male catkins. They develop the previous fall. And then in the spring, you see them, they grow, and they're very evident on the branch. And then this like pinky red flower shows up, and that's a female flower. And they pollinate the female flower. And then in the fall, you have this beautiful yellow leaf color. So it really is a pretty shrub to add to your garden. It'll be pretty all year round. The nuts ripen in August and September, and we can roast and eat them. They're not the commercially available filbert, but they are edible. I have never tried them, but they are edible. The husk surrounding the nut, it extends beyond the nut, and it got its common name because it looks a bit like a beak. I wish I had a picture of that. I'll have to add it. It's quite cute. I planted my neighbors' gardens an awful lot because I've run out of room. So my other neighbors on the west side have a beaked hazel in their yard. Now, if you want to go with, I'm sorry, I wanted to mention that it tolerates compaction and drought. So also important if you are in a city to know that you're putting in something that's has a hope in hell of making it. It naturally occurs from Newfoundland to BC, so it has a wide range. Another one in this genus that works really well in gardens and has a lot to offer is the American hazel. It might be a little more familiar to some of you. It's a great hedge or windbreak as well, edible nuts as well, tolerates clay, and also can be grown around a black walnut. And a few of the other species I mentioned earlier, alternate leaf dogwood and Prunus virginiana, those do fine with, they can tolerate the black walnut as well. Now this has a smaller range in Canada, and it's more in the southern parts of eastern and central Canada. I've just got one more slide on shrubs, and then I'll move into my final related but not shrub featuring slides. So I wanted to mention a couple evergreens, because at least where I live in Toronto, I really believe there aren't enough evergreens in the city. And we all know how important evergreens are for bird protection, bird habitat, especially through the winter. I don't have evergreen shrubs in my garden, but I have cedars in my garden. And in the wintertime, those cedars, they keep the depression away, because they are always filled with juncos and chickadees and northern cardinals. So the songs that come from that cedar is just lovely. But we're talking about shrubs today, and I wanted to talk about the Canada yew and creeping juniper as two examples that work well in gardens, and they're native shrubs. The yews that I see mostly are not the native yew. They're European and Japanese yews. They're popular as ornamental plants, but native species would work for sure. So I've got the Canada yew featured here. It would be a low maintenance spreading ground cover. If you were looking for a different kind of ground cover and a bigger ground cover, this could be the one for you. Its native range is Manitoba to Newfoundland. It prefers partial shade and moist loam soil. It naturally exists along shorelines and in woody swamps. It does well in mass plantings, and it provides excellent shelter for birds, especially in the wintertime. Down at the bottom is the creeping juniper. So there are 4 native species of juniper in Canada. 2 of them are shrubs, and one of them is featured here, creeping juniper. It's a mat-forming trailing shrub that makes a reliable and wildlife-friendly ground cover. Again, if you don't mind a higher ground cover. This one is as high as the yew. It gets to maybe 1 or 2 feet tall. It would be perfect for a hot, dry garden. It has a native range that is huge from Yukon to Newfoundland. And those little blue, they're like berries. Those are the actual female seed cones that look like berries and are often referred to as berries, juniper berries. Those are the ones I'm going to mention today. There are so many others. Again, it was hard to choose, but I chose the ones that mean something to me and that have a large range. And now I just have a few other things I'd like to mention before we wrap it up. So this image is from Heather Holmes' website, Pollinators of Native Plants. And this is an image demonstrating soft landings. Soft landings is a great concept that both Douglas Talame and Heather Holmes champion. Soft landings are diverse native plantings under keystone trees. So the trees that support a lot of Lepidoptera and other insects. But you can have soft landings under any native tree or shrub. What it really means is we know now more about insects, and we know that although during the growing season, they might be up in the canopies of trees and shrubs, through the winter, they might be down below on the ground, in the humus level, in the top part of the soil, in amongst these plantings, in leaf litter. So soft landings are just protected areas for insects through the winter. So we're supporting insects all through their life cycles and in all different seasons. That's the idea of soft landings. And I just thought it was a pretty cool concept, so I wanted to include it here. There's also a picture of a pithy stem. That's actually a sumac stem. And sumac is also, staghorn sumac is fabulous. It's just, I don't have enough space for staghorn sumac, but there's a picture of a stem that was either cut off deliberately or snapped off, and that made it accessible to a cavity nesting bee. And then down below is the cocoon of a moth. I think it was the Cecropia moth that I found on a hike. And I just throw it in as an example of often we're living amongst all these cool insects at different stages of our lives and we don't even notice them, but they do need the space to exist. So yeah, just an idea to remember that native plant gardening at its best is about reconnecting species and about restoring communities. And I think we really need to stop thinking of plants as commodities that we buy one in one store, one in another store based on aesthetics only, and just understanding their role in ecology and their connection to other species. Just a few points here on planting, old news for anyone that is a gardener, so I'll be quick about it, but to bring your Latin to the store, so the Latin names, to try when possible to get a straight species without the cultivar in the quotes after the name, to research your sources. So if you're buying a plant, where was it sourced, and not just like where was it grown before it came to that nursery, but where is it the seed source. And that's why, again, I really tend to try to support the native plant nurseries, the specific ones, specialized ones, because they really do their homework, and often they're growing from seed right on their property. And how is it propagated? I mentioned, I think that some of these plants are clonal, and it's easy, especially willows, it's really easy to take cuttings and to just put the cuttings in the ground or for a while in a pot and grow them that way. And that's fine if you have a small garden, but we wouldn't want to rely on cutting only for propagation, because then we have genetic clones of one another, and diversity. We want diversity at the genetic level, as well as the species level, as well as the ecosystem level. Obviously, your plants have a better hope of surviving if you get them small and young, even though it is tempting sometimes to buy the big tree and not have to wait. Spring or fall are great for planting woodies. And if they are alone in a lawn without a lot of stuff around it, consider putting a mulch mat, which is just cardboard, or you could put newspaper down and then mulch on top, but not close to the bark. And for the first year or two, or through severe drought periods, to water frequently and deeply, and to prune carefully and sparingly with a clean piece of equipment. I'm not going to say much more about pruning because I'm no expert, and you can refer to your trusted websites and books and arborists for that. But I think if hopefully you can remember that pithy stems are really important for cavity nesting bees and other insects as well. So if you're going to prune, perhaps don't take off the whole stem. If you have a pithy stem, leave part of it there to be used by insects. And if you really want to take it off, perhaps you can leave it in another place in your garden. I put these two pictures in because this is, I think, an incredible example of what can happen when you put native plants in. That little saw-whet owl visited that tiny native plant garden in a subdivision in Brampton, Ontario. This is my friend's old garden, and that garden was maybe 2-3 years old, not old at all. And one morning he looks outside the window, and there is a tiny little saw-whet owl. It's like the size of my hand, and it stayed there all day. Everywhere else was lawn, and this one little patch of shrubs and trees, and the owl found it and stayed there for the day, which was pretty spectacular. Native plant sources. There's too many to list across the country, but on the left side, you'll see 3 websites where you can go and get lists of native plant suppliers or maps of native plant suppliers. And one of those is the North American Native Plant Society's website, where you can get a list of commercial growers. On the other side are some specific, and not stores, but some specific sources other than stores. And it was mentioned already by Ali that on May 20th at Toronto Botanical Garden, NAMPS is having its annual sale, which is fantastic. An organization for which I volunteer is LEAF, and they do spring and fall deliveries of native plants. Out in the Fraser Valley of British Columbia, there's an organization there, Fraser Valley Conservancy, that does spring and fall sales. Out on Prince Edward Island, there's McPhail Woods. These are just a few of the many examples, but if possible, support your specialized native plant nurseries or organizations that offer native plants. It's wonderful to see all the free resources available for people now. It certainly wasn't always the case. When I started talking about native plant gardening 20 years ago or 21 years ago, we didn't have all of this information. And now there's so much information, it can almost be overwhelming. So I hope I'm not overwhelming you here, but these are some fantastic resources. Some of them, like the Birds Canada website and the Pollinator Partnership Canada website, you can type in your address and you'll get a list of native plants that work for your garden. You can put in a little more information like the conditions in your garden, or you can keep it more broad. You can look for grasses and wildflowers, you can look for woody plants, or you can look for it all. So if you get a chance, check out some of those. And I also wanted to shout out to the native plant societies and the invasive species councils that exist in the provinces and territories across Canada. I've volunteered for the local one, and I've had the pleasure of working with the British Columbia Invasive Species Council the last year, to a little bit, just because they've joined a program that I work on the David Suzuki Foundation. These societies and councils do so much education, and I just think they're fantastic. So look for one in your neighborhood, in your area. Remember books? I have a few favorite books, and so I put some of my favorites up here. I do grow herbaceous plants from seed, but I've never grown trees from seed. So the one at the top above the picture is Growing Trees from Seed by Henry Koch, who unfortunately died young, way too young. He was a professor and he worked at the Arboretum at University of Guelph. And I took a few classes with him, and what an incredibly knowledgeable and dedicated person. I have his book and I sift through it, but I've never taken the plunge. So that's definitely something I do want to do. And that's a great manual. Of course, there's all sorts of information online as well. I wanted to thank those that have contributed pictures. Some of the pictures were mine, but many were not. So I've got some friends there. My husband's in that list. And then iNaturalist is a source. If anyone is part of iNaturalist, which is a great community science program or website, and it's global, you can also get pictures from there. You just have to be careful about the copyright. So anyway, thank you to everyone that has contributed pictures. And I also wanted to end with this lovely picture of meadowsweet flowers. Meadowsweet is a small shrub that grows mostly along shorelines, along ponds. I had it in my garden, but it was spreading quite a bit. I ended up passing it on to my mother-in-law, who has way more space than me. But now I miss it because it was a bee magnet. And there's a picture of an eastern bumblebee. It's a female. You can see the pollen basket on the leg. So I just wanted to end on that lovely picture, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Colleen. That was a wonderful presentation, so vivid and so informative. I have a request from the audience to go back one slide so they could just see your slide showing the book list and some of the, the book list. So that's going up. And I do have some questions that have been coming up throughout the course of the discussions, some of which our audience members have been nice to, as a community, answer amongst themselves, and some of them that still remain unanswered. So I think I'm going to kind of scroll back to some earlier times in the conversation and start posing a few questions for you, if you're okay with that.
Sure.
We'll start off with the very first one, and maybe you can speak a little bit more to it. It was partially answered throughout the talk, but have you found any issues with having cedars and serviceberries in the same yard? There was an issue concerning cedar rust.
Okay, so one summer we did have that. We had it show up on our serviceberry, and so all our fruit would start to form and then not continue. So we didn't get any fruit that year. And I was really concerned about the following year, what would happen. But they were fine. So I'm not sure why. I do have them in different parts of the garden. Sorry, I'm pointing as if you can see and as if you're familiar with my garden, but I have the cedars at the back by a laneway, and then the serviceberry is right up close to my house. But still, it's close enough that there is that concern. I only had 1 year where I had a problem, because I did have an arborist friend that diagnosed it, but I don't know why it didn't come back the next year.
Thank you. Do you have any comments in regards to, in a similar stream, black knot or black spot fungus, or in the case for prunus species, black rot, I think is what it's called, black knot?
I did have black knot on a choke berry, so Prunus frigidiana specimen 1 year, and it was really bad. And at first I didn't do anything about it, but then I realized it was very bad, and so we ended up pruning it, and it looked terrible for a year. But then and then it was better. But I was told to prune it during the winter time and to dispose of in the garden any of the infected branches. So that's what I did. I think if you monitor your prunus specimens, I mean, that's easy for me to say because I have a small garden. If you have a large area, it's harder. But if you notice that appearing on your prunus trees and shrubs, to remove it as soon as you see it, or ask an arborist. I don't know if you're supposed to wait until winter. That's what I was told by a particular arborist, and then dispose of the infected branches.
Thank you. For the next one, this one's pertains to beaked hazelnut or hazel in particular. Since beaked hazel has male and female parts, you can only have one, right? Or you don't need several for pollination?
Yes, that would be when you have the female and the male flowers on the same, then I don't think, yeah, you should be, in theory, you should be fine. Like, it's still nice to have multiple of the same species when you can, but you don't always have the space. And my neighbors only have one. So I guess with, yeah, the male and the female on the same, you're okay that way. You will still get the nuts.
Excellent. Are smooth rose, Rosa blanda, rose hips edible for humans, such as for tea, for example? And also we have a question in terms of fragrance level. Do you find Rosa blanda to be particularly fragrant? So edible and fragrance.
You can use the hips, and I meant to mention that, and I'm sorry I didn't, because it is obviously so important. Many of these ones I've mentioned have such a connection to culture, and that one does, and that one is used. It is used, it's edible, but it's also used for like body products, I guess cosmetic products. I'm not sure what the term is because I'm not really, that's not my world, but that kind of a product. So you can use it for different things. I do find that my rose flowers, first of all, I don't get that many because it's in the shade now because of the other stuff growing up. And they do smell beautifully, but not for long. For like at the start, when the flower opens, there's a beautiful fragrance. But I find that it doesn't stick around for very long.
Excellent. Another question in regards to our native viburnums. Do you find that they're susceptible to pests? A particular question regarding viburnum leaf beetle. Are you aware of?
So that is a plant that I don't have in my garden. And to be honest, I've never grown it in any of my neighbors' gardens as well. That is a shrub that I am familiar with more in natural settings. But I definitely have heard about that being a concern. I really think that, as a gardener, you love to be in your garden. If you're like me, you're rather obsessed and often hide out in the garden to avoid your family. And so if you're just constantly monitoring for pests or diseases, you can act when it's necessary. Also, you just want to have healthy conditions. So making sure that the soil is of good quality, and that if it's a period of drought, if the tree looks like it's suffering from drought, definitely making sure you're watering regularly. But I really can't speak to, I haven't had the problem because I haven't grown it in a garden situation. I remember putting it in naturalized settings in ravines and parks, but I didn't go back and monitor.
Thank you. You kind of spoke to this, and maybe the group as well kind of chatted about this. Will a lot of these grow if black walnut is around? Like, maybe you can speak to it in terms of the diversity of species you mentioned and their susceptibility to the compounds that black walnut releases into the soil.
Yeah, I remember when I was younger and I first heard about black walnut, or I would hear people often talking about black walnut and not wanting to put it in their gardens because they believed that nothing else would grow around it. And that isn't true. You do need to be thoughtful about it. But Leaf, as an example, sends out hundreds of black walnuts every year. And there are herbaceous plants that naturally grow among black walnut. And then some of the species I mentioned today are absolutely tolerant of the chemicals that are released by black walnut. So alternate leaf dogwood is one of them. I've got the list somewhere and I can definitely send it, but yeah. And then like herbaceous stuff too. Many of us, we spoke with botanists that know a lot more than us who just promote these things and got lists of herbaceous plants that regularly or naturally exist with black walnut that also do well in gardens. And so if that's of interest to the group, I can find the list and share it with you, Natasha, and we can pass it along.
That would be excellent. We will forward off any information that you provide to the NAMS community on the website or through our social media channels. Thank you. Next question that I have, you're doing great. Thank you so much. This is a question about mulch. So taking it verbatim, wood chip mulch isn't preferred, I've heard. Leaf mulch is. Most of my leaf mulch is maple leaves, but I've been told that they aren't ideal because they are too big and can form mats. But we aren't supposed to mulch the leaves because you are killing eggs and larvae. So what do you recommend for mulch?
Well, to be honest, I don't mulch. I mentioned mulch with a newly planted tree. Say you're putting a tree in a lawn that does not have any natural debris that you can use as mulch. So in that case, you might want to buy a bag of mulch and use it for the first year. Maybe you're putting down some newspaper or some cardboard around to suppress the grass or other weeds that might come up around the shrub you've put into your lawn. And so then, yeah, for the first year, buy some mulch if you'd like. But ideally in time, you want your garden as much as possible to act the way nature does. And nature doesn't go and buy mulch, nature produces mulch. And also mulch can be, you can have green mulch, which is just really, sometimes people use that term, some people might not. It's just the low growing green vegetation. So even like wild strawberry, putting wild strawberry around the base of your trees or your shrubs and using that as living mulch as opposed to mulch. So I would say there's no hard and fast rule. It really depends on the status of your garden. If it's a new garden going in grass, you have nothing, you don't have any leaves on site, buy a little bit of mulch. Make sure you don't put it right up against the bark. You also don't want to overload with mulch because some bees are cavity nesting, but many are also instead ground nesting. And so you do want some area of soil that the bees can access. So I would say go easy on the mulch, and if possible, just use whatever falls on your garden as mulch. And a mix of leaves is fine. I know, like I have a lot of oak leaves, and those are persistent mulch. They don't disintegrate as quickly as, say, the maple leaves do. So I have a mix, and I kind of make it up as I go, what's available. I'm very cheap and lazy too. So following nature's rule of just making do with what falls it works very well for me.
Excellent. Thank you. The questions keep on coming in. So next is an indirect question. A lot of these plants that you have showcased here are loved by deer. And this statement is speaking to the fact how they'd love to incorporate them into the garden, but the concern is deer. And I wonder, asking on behalf if there's some suggestions that you have to kind of increase the likelihood of decrease the likelihood of browse, sorry.
Well, when I feel your pain. I remember when I worked at Toronto Region Conservation Authority, and Natasha, you probably know this too. We did so many plantings in the ravines. Mm-hmm. And it basically was like setting out a buffet for deer. You'd go back a few weeks later and you were like, what? So I have the luxury of not having to worry about deer. So I feel like I can't really suggest much other than when I look at herbaceous plants, we do suggest ones that have like a texture to the leaves, any kind of a texture or a scent, possibly as deer resistant. but I can't say much more. I'm sorry. I'm an urban gardener and I don't have to worry about deer. Again, that's something, you know, Natasha and I, maybe we can put something together and include it in the notes after. I don't have anything else to add right now.
Absolutely. We'll move on to the next question. And how close, I guess, can you plant chokeberry close to the house or next to it?
You can. Sometimes the soil next to a house is very it's not very good because it's fill. I don't know how old your house is. But you can. It does get very wide. Were you talking about aronia? The chokeberry?
Maybe we can speak to both. The question specifically states chokeberry, but it's so close to chokecherry, so maybe you can speak to both.
Okay, well, chokeberry is almost as wide as it is tall. So it's not that tall and it is wide. And so you would just have to keep that in mind and maybe go like at least a meter out from the house. There are more lean shrubs that you might, if you're looking to go closer to the house, you might want to try those. I don't know where the person is located in Canada, but in my area, like when I had the meadow suite, because that is not very big at all and it's not very wide, I had that close to the house. And I was so surprised how well it did in a completely different environment than its natural environment. Like usually I see it when I'm canoeing along the shore, and here I put it in a garden and I don't even have a water source out in the front. So it didn't get a lot of water. It did really well. There might be better choices that are a little less rotund than the chokeberry. Chokecherry, the prunus species, like it's a big shrub. So if you don't mind having a big shrub close to your house, you could go for it. You certainly would get lots of bird songs close to your windows, because I find that my cedars and my chokecherry attract the most birds in my garden.
All right. Next question. More was a statement just saying that a number of these native species that you've talked about tonight can be collected via seed if people want to take on that lovely challenge of growing something by seed. There's the opportunity to do that. Another question is just asking, are there cultivars of native shrubs that should be avoided? I know viburnum is often a hot topic. The questioning the source of that stock and whether or not it truly is what's labeled in the nurseries. It's not a cultivar, but
yeah, it's such an important question, and I'm no expert and I struggle with these questions as well. Just today as part of my job, I was talking to someone who grows a native plant grower out on the East Coast about nativars. So maybe I'll just mention a couple things. There is some cool work happening more south of the border at Mount Cuba about the use of nativars by insects. Mount Cuba is a botanical garden. I think it's in Delaware. Douglas Talamay and others are doing research with this botanical garden. And the way that a plant is changed matters in terms of then its usefulness by insects. So are you changing the flower shape, the flower color, the flower size? Is the pollen, is the nectar less or more available to the insects? So it really depends on what you're doing to the plant. And there are nativars of shrubs as well as nativars or cultivars of shrubs, native shrubs. They're called nativars when it's a native species. And just as there are of herbaceous plants, so soft-stemmed. But the other issue with cultivars is that you lose your genetic diversity, because a cultivar is when we like a particular characteristic, we've obtained a characteristic after working on a species, and then we keep wanting that exact same plant. So we lose genetic diversity. So there's the issue of, is the plant still providing floral resources to insects and to bees, say, pollinators? And then there's the issue of genetic diversity. I would say if you're really getting into native plants, it's so wonderful to go to a specialized native nursery, because native plant nursery, these for the most part are people that are botanists, and they're really careful about where they get their seed. They're really careful about growing from seed because they know that genetic diversity matters. And they're so knowledgeable. It's like going to school as well as going to a store to pick up your plants. So if possible, connect with a native plant nursery in your area. You can ensure that you're going to get the real deal, and you're going to get an education out of the experience as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Colleen. We still have a few more questions for you. In regards to deer resistant or plantings, we have a lot of comments in the chat coming in, stemming from planting roses and hawthorns to a variety of other things. So please read the chat to get some feedback from the community. While I move on to the next question, which is a site condition question. So I live on the top of a hill, full sun, always a breeze, hot, dry, and poor soil. Is there a shrub you would recommend for hedge and windblock as a shrub, as a windblock?
Well, I'm not sure where the person lives, but Staghorn sumac does well on hills in sun with no irrigation. It's often planted by the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario because you do nothing. You don't have to mow it. You put it in and you forget about it. So I don't know how the person feels about Staghorn sumac. I don't know where they live, but if that's a native shrub, that might be one that, and of course it's gorgeous en masse on a hill when the fruiting bodies are out, and then again in the fall when all the red leaves are out. I would just look to nature again as a guide. So if you are on a hike and you see a similar kind of landscape, and then with your iNaturalist app, identify some of the species that you see there, and then see if those are commercially available in your area.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to read this question out loud. I'm not sure if I quite understand it. Many that I like are better in wet conditions. Is it worth trying in a regular, drier setting, like buttonbush, winterberry, red twig, dogwood, etc.?
Well, meadowsweet was one that I tried, and I really didn't think it was going to do well in my garden in Parkdale, Toronto, but it did. It is amazing that some species seem quite adaptable. So they have their natural habitat, but amazingly enough, are adaptable and can do well in a garden setting. Some of them do too well, and then you kind of lose if you have a small garden, and you want diversity, it's a bit tricky. So I would say you could try. I did have a species in here which I took out, as I talked to Natasha about it beforehand, high bush cranberry, and that is because there are issues with sourcing and issues of it's hard to find the real deal native that hasn't hybridized with the European species. But that is a plant. Now I'm wondering if I've always been seeing the non-native, but I do even recall seeing high bush cranberry at native plant nurseries, and then people bringing them home and putting them in a lawn. Now that seems insane to me, but perhaps if you're mulching it with living mulch or wood chips and leaves and you're watering it, it will do all right. I suppose you could try buttonbush. It almost breaks my heart to think of it in a lawn. So I guess even though it might work, and Leaf does sell, but I'm pretty sure Leaf sells buttonbush. So that's that organization in Toronto that has a service to get native plants out into people's yards. You could try it, and maybe bring it in with a number of other plants that are associated with it in the wild, or maybe a few 2 or 3 specimens of the same species, and baby it for a while and see how it goes.
Nurturing nature. I love it. Next question that we have for you is, I'm wondering if it makes sense to wait until late spring to chip or mulch the leaves to let overwintering insects emerge. Do you have any position on that or?
Again, I really try not to be too prescriptive because people have different attitudes towards leaves and live in different neighborhoods. I grew up in a very suburban area where I think there really was that keep up with the Joneses attitude. Where I live now, it's less so. And I don't do anything with my leaves. I leave them in the spring. I do take a few off and end up using them in my compost, but I tuck them into the garden beds in the fall and I leave them there, maybe like pulling them aside when I see a little plant coming out. But a lot of them I just leave and don't ever remove. But I mean, you have to take into account your own aesthetic, that your neighbors, your issues with neighbors, bylaws, whatever. But if you want to do that, I think it is wise to wait until you see insects moving around, until it's maybe consistently above 10 degrees or maybe even more, to make sure that some of those hibernating insects, or maybe all of them, are gone before you start to shred your leaves. That seems reasonable to me.
Seems reasonable to me too. Colleen, does fragrant sumac spread or sucker like other sumacs in your
Not the
experience?
way Staghorn sumac does, but it does. Gosh, you know what? Again, I haven't planted it in my own garden. I've seen it in other people's gardens. And so I'm sorry, I'm not sure. I do often see it en masse. So I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I'd have to look it up.
Maybe we could follow up with that at a
Mhm.
later time. Another question I have for you is, I have a small lawn space on which I would like to plant a tree or larger shrub. Utilities run across the lawn. What are the root systems like on native sumac or elderberry?
I remember elderberry, when we used to plant elderberry with the TRCA, Toronto Regional Conservation Authority, and Natasha, you would know this, they're bare roots. So they pull them out of the ground at the nursery and then you plant them the same day, which is a great way to plant, to do it if you can, because you don't have to use the black plastic. But I do recall the roots of elderberry being so massive that it almost looked the same on below ground as it did above ground, just the branches and then the thick roots. So I'm not sure how deep they are. It's not like it has a tap root elderberry. You'd probably be fine. I have so many things in my yard that people have warned me about. I have burrow in my tiny little garden and it hasn't caused a problem yet. It goes up to the attic where I'm sleeping now, where I'm sitting now, sorry, I should say. So I think you would be fine with many of the native shrubs, if not all of them. Certainly like a serviceberry would be so gorgeous in a small yard because it has that open crown. You could still grow stuff down below. I can't imagine those roots would be a problem with your utilities. If you want to be extra careful, you can call your utilities here in Toronto. There's a number you call to get a utility check. They might give you some guidance.
Thank you for that. That was amazing. I have one last question that's coming in, unless anything else pops up through the chat or if I've missed anything. Do you have any tips for pruning these shrubs or good resources for tackling this?
I didn't want to suggest anything because I am no expert. I have been told with most of our shrubs, if not all of our shrubs, that the ones that I mentioned today, they're spring flowering. One clear thing I've been told over and over is never, unless there's been an injury, like say a particularly large raccoon bent one of your branches, never prune before flowering. But then I hear conflicting messages about, when to prune. Like my other go-to was always prune in the winter, but then apparently that's not always the case. So I really didn't want to say anything. I think that you should reach out to an arborist friend or a professional arborist. I'm not sure. The only thing I can say is please don't prune before flowering.
I think that's useful advice. And we have another question that came in. I have a Saskatoon berry, which is growing very slowly. Am I doing something wrong?
I don't know if it's in shade or what the conditions are like. It's not the longest living plant and it's not the fastest growing. Hopefully if it's a few years in, you're getting some flowers and fruit. Mine used to be very prolific, and then some neighbors built an addition, and it really cut back on the sun that it gets. So now it's gotten a bit leggy in an attempt to reach the sun, and the production of berries has gone down a bit, which is unfortunate. I'm sorry, I really can't say without knowing more about that particular thing. But I mean, if it doesn't look unhealthy, I would say just keep it going, and hopefully it will grow a little more.
Are there
you.
ideal?
It's not dense. It's not dense. I don't know if she means that or the person means it's not too tall, but sorry, Natasha, what was that?
I was just saying, perhaps you could just state what the ideal growing conditions would be for that one, and
Well, it will flower and fruit more the more sun it gets, but I have it in dappled shade. It's not too picky about soil. If it's still young, I would water it, but I don't water mine now. It's quite an adaptable species. I've seen it growing in the wild on like rocky soil, like so shallow soil on rock. It just isn't as dense looking. And then in the garden, it can look, especially if it has the space, it can look much more full and much more round, the canopy that is. Yeah, so it can look different based on the conditions.
absolutely, the growing conditions really dictates how it ends up presenting. The last question, we have like 8 minutes, but will propagating by cuts be okay with most of your favorites that you've like discussed tonight?
So I am not the person to answer that question because I don't have experience propagating, other than, again, when I worked for the TRCA, we would cut willows and we would actually weave them into the bank. I think it was called bioengineering, and willows are known for being easy to propagate by cuttings. So I don't think it's the same for all of them. Some are probably easier than others. Willows are very easy to propagate by cuttings. That book that I mentioned, this one here, Growing Trees from Seed, is an excellent source. And of course, there's a ton of more information online.
Thank you so much, Colleen. This presentation was amazing, and the audience members agree. We've been flooded with a lot of congratulations and appreciations for you taking the time tonight to share your knowledge with us. It's been much appreciated and highly informative. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
And I don't see any other questions that are coming in or have not already been answered by yourself and the amazing community. I'm really impressed with you guys for sharing your knowledge amongst each other. That's always really helpful, because we all bring different things to the table. So on behalf of everybody, I just want to thank you for presenting to us tonight. It's very much appreciated. And thank you all those in the audience for coming out tonight on the first day of spring and sharing your evening with us. And hopefully you're inspired to grow something beautiful or continue to grow something beautiful this year. Keep an eye out for upcoming events on the NAMS website. We're always thinking of new ways to share information with the community. And if you are interested in volunteering and you have some time, we would be happy to have you have a look at our website under the volunteer. There are many committee and board opportunities that present themselves. So thank you so much for your time this evening. Stay safe and stay well.